the southwestern United States in Arizona. I'm Navajo on my mom's side and African American on my dad's side. And I grew up on the Navajo reservation in Arizona. And so now, as in my work for the Indigenous Environmental Network, I work with a lot of different Indigenous people in the United States and Canada who are fighting different battles against energy development and climate change. So the question was, why did I get involved in this? That's all, I don't know why that's always such a hard question for me to answer, because I always just say because it's in my blood. You know, the community where I come from and our Navajo reservation is, and much like a lot of reservations throughout the United States and Canada, actually in the world, it's a battery for the rest of the United States. Our number one source of economic income is from coal mining. So we have like 3 coal mines on our reservation. We have several coal-fired power plants. We also have oil and gas development in the northern part of our reservation, and we have a history of uranium mining on our reservation as well. At the same time, our unemployment rate is 50% people are unemployed. You know, in the United States, our population has the highest rate or the highest number of unelectrified homes. So a lot of our people still live without electricity or running water. A lot of people are ranchers, so we have like sheep and cows and horses, and farmers. We grow corn, squash, beans. And so it's really fun. I mean, it's not funny, but a lot of people on our reservation are living in this situation, and yet we're providing electricity to major cities such as Los Angeles and Phoenix and Las Vegas. So we're in a situation where we're having to bear the burden of all these developments and get no real benefit from it. Because of these kind of fossil fuel developments, we have a lot of sickness in our communities. We have high rates of, you know, rare cancers, respiratory ailments, skin diseases, and our people are sick. Also, in the Southwest is a desert. You know, we live in a desert region, and water is a major concern for us. The development of these fossil fuels uses and contaminates a lot of water, and I think that's the real kind of the real impetus for a lot of our people to get involved in stopping these things is because of the use of water. You know, water is precious to us, and water is life in the Southwest. So this is kind of the situation that we're in. And I grew up at home, and you know, my uncle works for the coal mine. Everyone's dad and cousins and brothers and uncles, they all work for the coal industry in one way or another, you know. And I guess I grew up just kind of thinking, well, that's just kind of part of this society that I live in, you know. It didn't really occur to me to really question it, you know what I mean? At the same time, I think a part of our culture is really growing up and respecting our earth and respecting our Mother Earth and wanting her, believing that she's a person and wanting her to, understanding that she takes care of us, and so we also have a role of taking care of her and respecting her and loving her. And so I guess when I first started to think about these things, I went to college. Jackie mentioned that I went to school at Stanford, which is a prestigious university in the United States, and there are some very wealthy people at that school. Some very wealthy people, and I think, speak up? Okay. Oh, wow. Sorry about that. So I went there, and I think I finally first really saw the difference between where I grew up and how a lot of people in this country and in the world live. And that's when I started to question, like, why is it that, you know, a lot of our people are quote-unquote poor, you know, because I don't necessarily like to refer to ourselves as poor just because we don't have a lot of money. But are quote-unquote poor, and, you know, these people are all making money off of our sickness. And as you learn more and more about it, you learn that us as Native people and also other disenfranchised communities in the U.S. and around the world were intentionally put in that position through very specific and intentional policies of the U.S. government. You know, we didn't just end up that way, you know. It wasn't a coincidence. It was on purpose. And I think that's when I really first started to realize that and question it. And I went to school and I learned about like renewable energy and, you know, sustainability, and that we don't have to be so wasteful and so all-consuming. And so that's kind of when these questions started to go into my mind. And I learned about environmental justice, the difference between fighting for people's human rights and dignity and right to a good environment versus protecting trees, or, you know, environmental justice versus environmentalism. And I also learned that distinction about injecting, you know, race, class, gender into these discussions around the environment and climate change. So I think why I do this is, one, because it's in my blood, that I come from people who really do care about our Mother Earth, and from a family who has been protecting her for a long time, you know, so it's in me. And at the same time, I do this because our people are sick, you know, our people are being hurt, and what I want to do is to help our people and help Mother Earth. And I think that working on these really big issues of climate is a very important discussion to be involved in, because it can change a lot. It is changing a lot in terms of policies, national and international policies, and it can change things for good and it can change things for bad. And I'm really committed to making this issue work in our favor to make a better world for my people and everybody. So, thank you.
Okay. I mean, in some ways you've both already covered the second question, but would either of you like to speak more about how do you see climate change differentially impacting women and communities of color?
When I think about very specifically in the United States around the impacts of climate change and environmental injustice on women, my mind immediately goes to the mothers that I worked with in Detroit, who were the caretakers of the children who were either lead poisoned or asthmatic or both. And what we saw on a very regular basis was the stress, both mentally and physically, on the well-being of the mother and the household and the children because of the environmental situations that women and children were living in. In a lot of our poorer or more impoverished areas, there are quite a few single-parent households, mostly women-led households, that are dealing with, you know, no access to health insurance, no access to a substantial amount of income, but still having to deal with the taking care of very sick children. So that's really one of the ways that I see it happening and playing out, especially in the inner city. It's really the dealing with around health. I also think that when we look at issues around disasters and having to move out, women, you know, there were huge numbers of women left behind, huge numbers of women who aren't even able to return back home to New Orleans, for instance, especially women who were taking residence in public housing that has since been destroyed. So I really think that it's important that we look at the impact that, you know, public health is having around, or the impact that environment is having on public health, and how that then impacts the stress and issues around women, especially women who are caretakers and rearers of children.
So we have joining us Elizabeth, and I'm sorry. So just welcoming her to the panel here. We're just going through some questions that Nia and Jahan were answering, and then we'll have your response to, just as we laid out in the email. So yeah, so we'll have your reflections on that as well. But Jahan is just about to answer the question about how we see climate change differentially impacting women and communities of color. Pardon? Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, Indigenous people are affected. I'm going to try and kind of go through this part a little bit quicker. Indigenous peoples are affected by climate change, disproportionately affected by climate change in three main ways. The first is climate change itself. I think that a lot of our communities who still live subsistence lifestyles, or still live really close, who are primarily hunters and fishers and farmers, and who live off the land and practice a culture that is tied to a specific piece of land, are seeing the impacts of climate change first. Think about Indigenous peoples in Alaska or in the Arctic who are having to move. I think it's 100. They've confirmed 114 villages that have to move because of the ice that's melting. And so, you know, think about, well, what happens then to their culture when it's tied to like a very specific island or a specific piece of land, and then they're going to have to move. You know, where are they going to move to? Who's going to pay for it? You know, there's a whole realm now of climate refugees, the first refugees of climate change, that are having to move away from their homelands and territories because the ice is literally melting under their feet, or their islands being overcome by water. Where I'm from in Arizona, some of the things that we're noticing, well, we've been in a very long drought that has lasted 11 years. And we have one of a big staple in our food is pinon trees, like pine nuts, pinons. And so like they come out every 2 years in different parts of the reservation, and everyone goes and picks them, you know, all day. And we're noticing that all of those trees are dying from the top down. They're drying up from the top down, and that's a major concern.